The serf I cast out became my lord. For 7 years, he never forgot her eyes. Those cold, contemptuous eyes that once looked down on him, like he was dirt beneath her boots. Now those same eyes trembled at his feet. So why did his chest feel like it was caving in? He had come back for one answer. Just one. This is the story of a broken serf's cold-blooded revenge and the impossible love waiting at the very end of it. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Night Fox Bedtime Stories. Tonight's story is about 7 years of waiting, twisted together with hatred and longing. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The beginning of a twisted love. In those days, the kingdom was fat, with spring and blossoms drifted over every cobblestone. It was the spring that Lady Sylvain, the Chancellor's only child, turned 16. In the great estate of the Grand Chancellor, a mute serf arrived. His name was Rowan. 3 years before, he was no one's servant. He was the treasured son of a noble military family, a boy raised with a sword at his back and a book in his hand. But when Rowan was 15, his family was swept up in accusations of treason. His father bled out on their own courtyard stones. After that dawn, Rowan's voice simply vanished. His heart died, and his words died with it. Silence drew no suspicion. Silence earned no surveillance. His cold, unbroken quiet became the only armor he had left. And that armor carried him through the gates of the Chancellor's estate. He first saw Sylvain on an afternoon, when the sunlight was almost offensively bright. She was perched on the courtyard steps, fiddling with the ribbon at the end of her braid. When she noticed the new serf, she narrowed her cool eyes, and tossed out a single remark without even looking at him. So this is the mute one. His face is far too decent for a servant. She flipped her head away, utterly disinterested. But Rowan froze. Everyone else saw a spoiled nobleman's daughter. What Rowan saw was different. Beneath those deep, dark eyes was a loneliness, so severe it almost looked like hunger. This woman has never once been looked at with genuine kindness. A small crack opened in his chest, right where his heart used to be. Rowan swept the courtyard, hauled water, split wood. But his eyes followed Sylvain like a shadow wherever she went. When she sat weeping in a corner after a scolding, he stood just out of sight, holding his breath, watching her shaking shoulders. He had no words to offer and no right to approach. So he only watched from a distance, pressing down whatever hot thing kept rising in his chest. He did not dare give it a name like love. When the castle slept, Rowan crept into the Chancellor's private library. He read by cold moonlight. His father's last words drove him to it. Rowan, no one can ever take what you carry in your mind. As a serf, he memorized texts on philosophy and battle strategy. And then one silverlit night, he found a worn notebook tucked behind a row of books. It was Sylvain's. A verse she had hidden there, written away from her father's eyes. Spring passes and I do not know it is spring. The blossom falls and I do not know it has fallen. He held that notebook all through the night. The woman who cut people down with sharp words in the daylight. was pouring out this kind of loneliness onto paper in the dark. So this is what lives inside you. A flower that blooms in a season no one else can see. That night, for the first time, Rowan held her in his heart. Not as a lady to serve, but as a woman. There was an evening when Sylvain sat crouched alone behind the far wall, crying without a sound. Her father had scolded her again. Rowan was passing by with an armload of firewood. He saw her. He stopped. He could not go to her. After a long moment, he set down the firewood and placed something at the base of the wall. A wildflower. A single stem, picked from the road. Then he walked away. The next morning, Sylvain found it. She looked over at Rowan, who was sweeping the yard with his back to her. As if nothing had happened. She watched that back for a long time. Then she tucked the flower inside her dress. This person has been watching me. For the first time, Sylvain began to see Rowan, not as a mute servant, but as a person. Even so, the way she treated him in front of others never changed. She ignored him like he was furniture. She raised her hand to him over the smallest things. But when no one was watching, behind the servants' quarters where the shadows pooled, she was an entirely different person. One day, Sylvain knocked over her father's inkwell. It would be a serious matter if discovered. She stood there not knowing what to do. When Rowan appeared beside her without a word, he lowered himself to his knees and began to blot the ink with his own sleeve. At that moment, her father's footsteps sounded down the hall. Rowan tucked the stained parchment inside his coat. When the Chancellor entered, all he saw was Rowan standing there. Rowan was beaten for it. He never once looked at Sylvain. After that, Sylvain would slip out behind the servants' quarters after dark and press dried figs or honey cakes into his hands, grumbling the whole time. "This is not because I care about you. I had extras. Just eat it and get out of my sight." Rowan would take the fig and look at her. Her hand was waving him away. But the tips of her ears were flushed red in the moonlight. He bit into the figure. It was sweet. Impossibly sweet. That was his first real desire. Not for anything grand. Just the simple, aching want to keep receiving this warmth, she offered in her clumsy way. The private wish to be the only one who ever saw that blush. Then came the day everything cracked. Sylvain was crossing the courtyard with some young lords from a neighboring estate. Rowan was sweeping. For just a moment, his eyes found her. She walked straight past. No acknowledgement. Not even a flicker. Rowan stood there holding his broom. The night before, those same hands had pressed a fig into his palm. He swept again. He did it like it cost him nothing. But that night, he lay awake until morning. Was what she did in private real? Or was even that just something to fill the boredom? He did not know the answer. That was what hurt most. Sylvain knew what she was doing. She knew what wound was festering in his silence. But she could not stop. Her father's eyes were always sharp. If any word spread that the young lady had formed an attachment to a serf, The beating Rowan would receive would be 10 times worse. I have to be crueler. That way, he suffers less. It was her own way of protecting him. Clumsy, brutal, and something Rowan would never know. Chapter 2. The Jade Brooch, and Goodbye. Rowan had been at the estate just over 2 years. Sylvain was 18. Rowan was 20. One day, Sylvain showed him a jade brooch that had been in her family for generations. She could not have explained why. She just wanted to see those cold eyes light up. Just for a second, just for her. But the brooch slipped. It hit the ground and shattered. And the Chancellor was passing the very same moment. You dared corrupt my daughter and disgrace this house. Sylvain screamed. No, father. I dropped it. It was my fault. The Chancellor did not hear her. They beat Rowan until he bled. Sylvain threw herself at her father's arms. Please. He did nothing wrong. I did this. The Chancellor went quiet. Then, slowly, in an even colder voice, he said, if that is so, you should receive the punishment in his place. Sylvain's mouth closed. She knew that look. He meant it. She bit her trembling lip and bowed her head. I am sorry, father. In that moment, Rowan looked at her. Just once, through the blood on his face. It was not anger. It was not hatred. It was simply confirmation. So, that is how it is. That night, Rowan was cast out with nothing. As he was pushed past the gate, he turned back once. Sylvain was on her knees beneath the wall, weeping. The woman who had always held herself like she owned the world, looked, for the first time, very small. His expression held no anger and no grief. Only one thing. I will come back. And I will ask you. Were those figs real? Was that warmth something true? I only need to know that one thing. Sylvain sent servants searching for days. No one could say where the mute serf had been taken. Chapter 3. Rowan rises from the mud. Rowan was sold to a garrison on the northern frontier. Howling wind, the constant smell of blood and rotting earth. At first he was the lowest of the low. He carried food, shoveled filth, stripped armor from dead soldiers and helped bury them. No one looked twice at him. But Rowan's eyes were different. A man who does not speak watches the world instead. While carrying rations, he read the wind by watching which way enemy banners leaned. While shoveling dung, he mapped the weak points in his camp's perimeter. Every battle theory he had ever read by moonlight, in that stolen library came alive against the reality of war. One night, Rowan traced a rough map in the dirt with his finger. He marked the route the enemy would use to attack before dawn. A junior officer laughed at him. At dawn, the enemy came exactly where he had drawn. After that, the word spread like wildfire. That mute serf can read a battlefield. Rowan rose fast. From camp hand to the silent strategist of a small unit. He never spoke. But soldiers moved on a single gesture of his hand, as if their lives depended on it, because they did. In time, the men simply called him captain. It was a brutal winter. In a night raid during a blizzard, their position was surrounded. A young soldier, barely 17, took a lance through the side and fell. The boy looked up at Rowan through the blood on his lips and tried to smile. "Captain, I don't think I can get up." Something inside Rowan's throat, something that had been asleep for 7 years, tore itself loose. The image of his father bleeding on the stones of their home rose up and merged with the boy in front of him. Rowan seized the boy by the collar. And for the first time in 7 years, he opened his mouth. "Get up." A ragged, rusted sound. 2 syllables dragged up from a throat that had forgotten how to make them. Every soldier nearby went rigid. The mute. Speaking. The boy's eyes went wide. Then he set his jaw and pushed himself to his feet. Rowan put the boy on his back and broke through the enemy lines alone. He held off 10 soldiers by himself and brought every one of his men out alive. Back at camp, he sank into silence again. But something burned quietly in his chest. There is still something I need to say. I must say it. The garrison commander, Lord Aldrich, summoned him. A face full of scars. A uniform in tatters. But eyes that did not flinch from anything. "You saved dozens of my men. Tell me what you want." After a long silence, Rowan answered. "A name. And a place." Aldrich laughed out loud. "Not gold. Not freedom. A name and a place." Aldrich argued for Rowan's release from bondage before the king. Rowan was freed. He spent every night in Aldrich's library until his knowledge outpaced men who had been studying their whole lives. When the day of the great examination came, Rowan of Ashfield placed first. The examiners murmured, "This is not simply learned writing. This is the blood of a man who has survived everything and put it into words." With his battlefield record and his examination result together, Rowan rose through the court at a speed no one could match. By his own strength, he claimed the rank of Lord. On the very day he received that title, the first thing he did was send riders to find what had become of the Chancellor's estate. Treason. The family destroyed. The daughter sold into servitude. Rowan sat alone that night, holding a dried fig in his palm. Small, shrunken, hard as a stone. He had carried it for 7 years. He stared out the window until dawn. "My lady, I have found you." Whether it was for revenge or to answer the question that had lived in him all this time, he himself could not have said. He sent a quiet request to have Sylvain assigned to his household. No magistrate in the kingdom refused a lord's request. Chapter 4. The lady returns as a servant. In the 7 years since Rowan was cast out, where had Sylvain been? Less than a year after he left, her father was arrested on charges of treason. Sylvain was standing in her sleeping clothes when the soldiers came at dawn. Her silk dresses became rough linen overnight. The Grand Chancellor's daughter became the brand of a traitor's child. She drew water before sunrise and washed linens until her hands split open. But what truly broke her was not the labor. It was Rowan. His face never left her. That look as he was pushed through the gate, the one that said, So that is how it is. The guilt chewed at her from the inside, deeper than any physical pain. She had people searching for him across the kingdom. No one remembered where the mute serf had gone. 7 years passed. And then she was assigned to the household of Lord Rowan Ershfield. The door to the Lord's study swung open. Inside, lit by a single candle, a man sat behind a wide oak desk. The mute serf she had thrown out 7 years ago looked up at her now from behind the eyes of a lord. He rose and walked toward her. The boyish lines she remembered were completely gone. A long scar ran along his jaw. His eyes had the weight of someone who had looked at death, from very close range, many times. I did that to him, she thought. I made him into this. He crossed the room, tilted her chin upward with one rough hand, and brought his lips close to her ear. Well, we meet again. The same hands that used to throw me into the dirt. Shall I put them to work now? He did not wait for an answer. You are no longer a lady. You are my servant. Then he pulled open the desk drawer and held up a dried figure. Sylvain's breath stopped. A figure. Exactly like the ones she used to press into his hands in the dark. He had prepared this deliberately. Do you remember this taste? He placed one end of the fig between his own lips. His eyes, cold and still, held hers. He was telling her, in the cruelest and most precise way possible, that what she had given him as warmth had come back as a blade. Then he put one hand behind her neck and pulled her to him. He kissed her. 7 years of rage. 7 years of longing. He could not have told you which one was moving through him at that moment. The sweetness of the fig hung in the air between them. Sylvain could not sleep that night. She lay pressing the back of her hand to her lips. No one had ever kissed her before. And of all people, of all ways, that way. She was furious. She was humiliated. And she could not stop replaying it. The heart, she was finding, does not always listen to reason. In the days that followed, Sylvain completed every task Rowan assigned her without complaint. Every time she endured without breaking, something in his chest twisted in a way he had not planned for. Then came the night. Rowan had fallen asleep slumped over his desk. Sylvain came in to tidy the scattered books and letters. As she moved closer, the fabric of his coat fell open. She swallowed a cry. The scars across his back, his shoulders, his chest, were terrible. Flesh that had been split open and healed wrong, over and over, in layers. She recognized some of them. They were from her father's household. From her father's orders. Her hand was shaking as she reached toward them. The hand she thought was asleep shot out and seized her wrist. Getting a close look? His voice was quiet but his grip was iron. Do you know how much these hurt? Every time I took a blow, I thought of you pressing that fig into my hand. I held on to that. And then you did nothing. One tear fell from Rowan's eye onto the back of her hand. It was not the tear of a man taking revenge. It was the tear of someone who had only ever wanted to be cared for. Sylvain pressed her face against his scarred chest, and wept aloud for the first time. Forgive me. Please, please forgive me. After that night, something shifted between them. But the fragile thing did not last long. Because of Elara. Lord Aldrich, before he died, had arranged a betrothal for Rowan. His final request was simple. If you want to hold this position, your household must be in order. Rowan had not refused. At the time, he did not even know if Sylvain was alive. Elara came from a respected family and had a fine character. A perfectly reasonable match. But Elara was sharp-eyed. Rowan was courteous to her, even warm on the surface. But his gaze drifted constantly toward the servant woman in the yard. That servant is no ordinary servant. One night, Elara summoned Sylvain to her chambers. No candles lit. She flicked a piece of honey cake to the floor at Sylvain's feet. "Pick it up." Sylvain looked at it. She did not bend down. 7 years of servitude had stripped almost everything from her. But somewhere in her bones, the Chancellor's daughter had not completely gone. Elara's eyes narrowed. A serf with pride. How charming. She lifted Sylvain's chin with one finger. How does a traitor's blood end up in my lord's house? Turning his head. Sylvain quietly removed Elara's hand. Elara seized her by the hair and dragged her to the floor. He is only using you to bleed out an old anger. Mistaking that for love is pathetic. The words hit like a knife between ribs. Because they could not be completely denied. A few days later, Elara went to Rowan. She settled close beside him, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, fingers tracing lightly over the back of his hand. That servant woman refuses to bow. She pushes my hand away. I am your intended, my lord. Rowan looked at those fingers on his hand and picked up a cup of wine, which happened to free his hand in the most natural way possible. But the words registered. Refuses to bow. Will not lower her head. An old memory surfaced. Having to keep his own eyes down, his mouth shut, his head bowed. The hand that pressed figs into his palm in the dark. And then pretended he did not exist in the light. Let her feel it, he thought. What it is to lower her head. He nodded slowly. I will handle it myself. One bright spring afternoon, Rowan arranged a small gathering in the garden pavilion for Elara. He had Sylvain called to serve the wine and lay the food. He picked up a dried fig from the plate and held it toward Sylvain. A dried figure. The same thing you used to press into my hand, behind the servants' quarters, 7 years ago. Offer it to my lady with the same care you gave to me. Sylvain's hands shook as she picked up the figure. She lowered herself to her knees before Elara and held it out with both hands. Rowan nudged Sylvain's shoulder with the toe of his boot. Lower your head. You stand before someone important. Sylvain bit her lip and lowered her head deeper. More. Eyes down. She pressed her forehead to the floor. Rowan said, just loud enough for Sylvain to hear, learn this. This is your place. Then he picked up another fig and dropped it in front of her face. It rolled and stopped at her nose. Sylvain stared at it from the floor. Then she stood up. Where do you think you are going? She did not answer. She just walked. Rowan did not call her back. He sat holding his wine cup without drinking. This was what he had wanted. He should have felt satisfied. So why did this feel so wrong? That night, Sylvain made a decision. She would leave. In the dark before dawn, she climbed a pile of stones against the outer wall and reached for the top. A cold voice hit her from behind. "Where are you going?" Rowan's grip closed around her wrist. She fought to pull free. "Let me go. Please. Let me go." He pulled her down and set her in the middle of the yard. The cold night air settled between them. In Sylvain's eyes there was no fear, no anger. Just the flat, exhausted look of someone who has used up everything they had. "Let me go, my lord. If you want your revenge, take my head. But if you keep me here, I will climb this wall again. I promise you that." Her voice did not shake. She did not cry. That was what frightened him. "Who gave you permission to leave?" His words were still cold. But the hand holding her wrist was trembling. Sylvain felt that trembling. She did not look up. Rowan let go. Sylvain went inside without a word. He walked into his study and closed the door. The next morning, when she came to bring his tea, he looked at her face and felt something in his chest go quiet all at once. The eyes that had once carried fear and tenderness were now perfectly still, like a surface of water that reflects nothing. He took the fig from his desk drawer. Hard as a river stone now. 7 years old. If revenge had been everything, he would have thrown it away long ago. It had dried and hardened over 7 years. And so had the hatred, the obsession, and the thing hidden underneath all of that. They were all exactly alike. "What was I thinking?" He said it out loud, to no one. He walked to Sylvain's door and knocked. Softly. Carefully. There was no answer. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned and walked back down the hall. That evening, he called his steward. "Before sunrise tomorrow, send Lady Alara back to her family's house. She is not to enter my gates again." Word spread through the household within days. The lord's betrothed had been sent home. Sylvain heard this and did not move for a long time. Why? She could not understand it. And that made it harder to stop thinking about. A few days later, she was moving a heavy barrel in the yard, and lost her footing. The barrel tilted. She had no time to react. Rowan's hands caught it. In doing so, his knuckles raked the edge of the stone wall. A clear line of blood appeared. Sylvain stopped breathing. Rowan said nothing. He righted the barrel, wiped the blood on his sleeve, and turned away. As if nothing had happened. She watched his back. She had seen that back before. 7 years ago, when he tucked a ruined parchment inside his coat. And took her punishment without once looking at her. This person was the same then as he is now. Something inside her gave way, quietly, like a wall that had held too long. Chapter 5. The Shadow, and Sylvain's Choice. The faster Rowan rose in the court, the faster his enemies gathered. At the center of them was Lord Vance, the head of a noble house that had shaped court politics for generations. He smiled to Rowan's face and raised cups with him. Inside, he could not accept that a man who had once been a serf was now threatening his position. Vance first saw Sylvain on a visit to Rowan's estate. While talking in the study, he happened to glance through the window. A woman in rough servant's cloth crossed the yard below. But her walk was wrong for a servant. There was something in the way she carried herself that could not be hidden. Vance set down his cup and smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. "That servant girl of yours is remarkably striking. As a gesture of our friendship, why not let me have her?" The room went cold. "Not her." Vance came back a second time with a better offer. "Court alliances. Favorable appointments." "Not her." Vance let the mask drop. He already held the card that could destroy Rowan. The secret that Rowan had concealed, his family's condemned history, to sit for the examination and enter court. If he could not take the woman, he would take everything else. Vance moved swiftly. He fabricated an accusation, claiming that Rowan had fraudulently concealed his origins. He bought witnesses and forged documents. Rowan was taken by the king's guard to the castle prison, and his estate fell quiet as a held breath. On the third day, a sealed letter arrived for Sylvain. "If you want Rowan to live, come to my manor before 3 days are out. I will present evidence of his innocence to the council. If you do not come, he will hang." Sylvain read the letter and did not move for a long time. "This man suffered because of me his whole life. He finally built something for himself. I cannot let it fall because of me again." On the morning of the third day, she rose before the sun was up. She sat at her mirror and dressed her hair carefully, the way she had done when she was still a lady. She tucked the letter inside her dress. It might serve as evidence, she thought. She walked out through the estate gates. On her own 2 feet. Rowan's most loyal servant, Edmund, had been circling the outer wall of the prison for days. He found his moment when the night guard stepped away and threw a small knife and a folded note over the wall. One line in the note: "The lady took the letter and walked out this morning. Exactly as you feared, my lord." Rowan read it and closed his eyes. He had suspected Vance would use Sylvain. He had suspected she would go. Knowing something and reading the words of it are 2 different things. The shackle chains were heavy. The prison wall was high. But the man who had once held off 10 soldiers alone did not find a single wall to be an obstacle. He ran through the capital barefoot. His coat was torn. The shackle marks had cut into his wrists. He felt none of it. He had only one thought: Sylvain. He kicked the door open. And there she was. Rowan seized Vance by the collar, while Edmund pinned Vance down. Rowan turned to Sylvain and pulled her to her feet. "Why did you come?" His voice broke on the last word. She did not answer. She wrapped both her hands around his torn, bleeding wrists. "Who told you to leave? Who told you to go anywhere without me?" He pulled her into his arms. Sylvain's face went into his chest. And then, for the first time in 7 years, she said his name. Rowan. He went absolutely still. The day you were thrown out, I wept for days. I sent people to look for you and no one could find you. I thought I would carry that debt for the rest of my life. When you came back as a lord, I was afraid of you. I was angry at you. But I was so glad you were alive. Rowan, there has not been a single day in 7 years when I did not think of you. Not even when you were hurting me the most. That was why it hurt so much. Rowan tightened his arms around her. I know. I never stopped thinking about you either. Not one day. I am sorry. I am sorry first. Outside, the sound of guards' boots grew closer. Edmund spoke low and urgent. My lord, the king's men are coming. Rowan did not move. When the doors burst open, he turned slowly, keeping Sylvain close. If you are here for me, take him first. He pointed at Vance. The evidence that I was falsely accused is in that room. And this. Sylvain reached into her dress and held out the letter. The one Vance had sent her as a threat. In his own handwriting. The court turned upside down. Vance was arrested on charges of fabricating accusations against a lord of the realm. Rowan's name was completely cleared. Chapter 6. My lady, my love. When everything had been set right, Rowan stood before Sylvain's door. He knocked with a care that had nothing in common with the cold man of a few weeks ago. When the door opened, he slowly lowered himself to one knee. All I ever wanted was to watch you crumble. To see your pride finally break. He reached into his coat and placed something in her open palm. But I never managed to throw away a single thing you gave me. She looked down. The dried figure. Hard and dark as a small stone. 7 years old. He had carried it through a war and a prison cell and still not let it go. Sylvain's eyes filled. You are not my servant. You are the one person who brought me back to life. The only one in the world. He pressed his lips gently to her forehead. She closed both hands around the figure. 7 years of wounds and waiting, all held inside that small, hard, irreplaceable thing. Between them, for the first time in 7 years, something sweet moved. Epilogue. Rowan rose, end time, to the highest seat in the king's council. No one dared speak of his past again. In the finest estate in the capital, on a table in the inner hall, there was always a small plate of dried figs. Rowan prepared them himself. The same humble fruit that Sylvain had once pressed into his hand in the dark, was now set out for her each day by his own hands. The two people who had once been each other's worst wound became, in the end, each other's greatest story. Because it is a true thing that even inside the deepest hatred, the seed of love can wait. Well, my friends, the connections between people are a strange and winding thing. What looks like hatred can become, in the end, the deepest kind of love. If tonight's story left a small warmth in your chest, please like and subscribe. I will be back with something even more impossible and heartbreaking. Until then, this has been Night Fox Bedtime Stories. Good night.